Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Jordan. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Jordan!
Yay! As you can see by our title up here, we are talking about the Shroud of Turin. Some of you may be familiar with what that is. Some of you may not be. But I've entitled this presentation "The Face of God," and we'll see why here shortly. So, the Shroud of Turin is a piece of cloth that is purported to be the cloth in which Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, was buried in. It is the single most studied artifact in human history. And tonight we're going to look at a comprehensive, or as close as we can get in an hour, look at the historical, forensic, and physical evidence, which I hope to leave with you the impression that it strongly suggests that the Shroud of Turin is exactly what it claims to be. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard, oh, it's just another Catholic relic. Oh, it was proved to be a medieval hoax. We're certainly going to address all those things. And the first thing I want to address is the idea that it is a relic. So a Catholic relic is more in the lines of, Saint Genevieve's, thigh bone or her sock or something like that. Something tied specifically to somebody else who had died with really no historical evidence outside of what the Catholic Church says it is. We're going to get into it more here soon, but the Catholic Church has had possession of the shroud for a very limited of time. This is not a relic, this is an artifact. It is a piece of history that we know about through archaeology and other means. So artifact's the word I want you to have in your head and not relic. Okay, so what exactly is the Shroud of Turin? Let's break it down a little bit. It's a material that is a high-quality linen composed of flax fibrils. That'll be important when we look at a few things here in a minute. The weave of the linen is done in what's called a 3/1 herringbone pattern. A lot of you interior design and people who like fancy dresses know more about what that means than I do. What's important to note is it is a difficult pattern to create, and it takes a long time to do so. So it is a very fine piece of linen. Dimensions, as you can see, 14 feet, 3 inches by 3 foot 7 inches wide, and 0.35 millimeters in thickness. That is approximately the thickness of the t-shirt many of you are wearing tonight. If you look at the image on the screen, you're going to see the darker part, and then you're going to see the lighter parts kind of behind it in the corner and these little holes right here. What you're actually looking at is a linen backing. The linen backing you're looking at in this picture would have actually been from the 1500s. Today, there's a linen backing that has been affixed as of the year 2002. It's important to note that linen, if we're looking at a piece of linen that we're assuming is roughly 2,000 years old, it's important to note that linen can last much, much longer than that. We have examples of linen garments from the ancient Egyptian dynasties that we can verify have lasted over 5,000 years. So linen in the right conditions can last forever. On the shroud, we have some interesting things. There are body fluids. There are pre- and post-mortem blood that has been shed before and after the subject interred in it had died, as well as fluid related to a pulmonary edema. If you don't know what that is, I'll explain more soon. The main feature on the interior of the cloth, and don't feel bad if you can't see it right now because this really isn't the best way, is an image of a man with his hands covering his midsection. You can kind of see the head right here. You can kind of see the hands and arms. And then in the center section, there is a fold. And then you see the back of the head and the back of the body there. There'll be definitely some more ways to view that here shortly. So a little bit more information on it. There are numerous sections of the shroud where it is damaged. Obviously, any of these marks that you can see, really dark areas, really light areas, is what we're talking about here. We know it has survived at least 3 fires. There's been over 30 patches made to it in previous eras. And something we'll cover in more detail a little bit later, is an invisible reweave. That was a repair made to it in the medieval days. At least we know for sure in the top left corner over here. The original backing of the cloth was damaged in a major fire in 1532. That's the fire we know the most about. And those patches were actually taken out and a new backing installed in 2002. You can also see already highlighted in the picture a bunch of L-shaped repeating patterns of holes. This is speculated to have been caused when the shroud was folded up and likely next to like a censer of incense and embers accidentally touched the cloth and burned through it while it was folded. So, that's not, yeah, I already covered that. Okay. And then you'll see a large strip cut from the top right corner, cut away over time and given as gifts over the years. Remember, this item is nearly 2,000 years old, and little pieces have been, we know through history, have been broken off and given to people over the years from the various people who've owned it. And then we have a smaller strip cut from the top left, which was done in 1988 for some sample testing. So some scriptural context for the shroud. The burial cloth of Jesus is mentioned in all the verses you see here, Matthew 27, 57 through 61, Mark 15, 42 through 47, Luke 23, 50 through 56, John 19, 38 through 42, as well as 21 through 8. The Greek words used in these, all of these verses are one of three. Either syndon, which means a fine linen cloth, shroud, or garment. Athonia, which means a linen cloth or sheet, or linen strips or bandages. And then sudarium, which is a handkerchief or a face napkin or a face cloth. The sudarium also references a separate cloth mentioned with the burial shroud, and we will cover that in detail soon. Okay, so the first picture we ever have of the shroud comes from a man by the name of Secondo Pia. It was photographed in 1898, where the shroud was kept in Turin, Italy. That's why we call it the Shroud of Turin. The St. John the Baptist Cathedral. It was routinely brought out at least once a year for a display, and I don't handle distractions well. And this was the first time someone was able to get a camera to take a picture of it. Cameras are brand new. This thing's about the size of a refrigerator. This guy's a wealthy lawyer, which is why he was able to afford one, and he was doing photography. He has nothing more than a hobby. So Secondo Pia takes the pictures of the shroud when it's out. He's like, hey, this is kind of neat, and goes to develop the negative. Those among us whose birth age doesn't start with the 19 remembers or won't remember that cameras used to show us their pictures by developing the film that was put in them. And the film presented a negative image first. Well, when Secondo looked at the negative image, he was shocked at how lifelike it was. He realized the detail that was in the negative image of the picture of the man in the shroud, and this garnered a lot of attention, and the shroud really started to pick up popularity at this point in time. The image of the shroud is a perfect photographic negative of the man, which means that what you're actually looking at when you look at the shroud itself is the negative, and the real image is what you see in negative photography, and you'll see that here shortly. Here's a few pictures he took at the event. This is the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. This is inside the cathedral where the shroud was kept and put on display. This is the official documentation of the fully developed, non-negative version of the picture. And here's a really good look at what that picture looks like with the photo negative. You can see a tremendous amount more detail, especially in the face here, throughout the shroud itself. This is another angle of just the body front of it, facing upright. You can see that quite a bit better. And then this is just the face. So where's the shroud today? It has been kept in the St. John the Baptist Cathedral since the year 1578. So it's been there for a minute. It was acquired by the papacy in 1983 as a bequeathment of the previous owner, the last king of Savoy, Umberto Savoy II. This was on condition that the papacy, accepting the shroud, had it remain in Turin, and so it has remained ever since. The original is no longer on display, but a replica is. The original is kept nearby under a laminated bulletproof glass in an airtight case, temperature and humidity controlled, filled with 99.5% argon and 0.5% oxygen. This thing's going to last a while, which is good. Here's an image of if you went to the St. John the Baptist Cathedral in Turin today, what you would see. Again, what you're looking at there is just the replica. So, some about the research and study. Since 1898, over 500,000 hours of study and experimentation have been done on the shroud, making it the single most studied artifact in human history. 63 academic disciplines, so archaeologists, anthropologists, hematologists, that list goes on and on, have studied the shroud for various reasons. And the most famous research done was by a team called STURP, or the Shroud of Turin Research Project, composed of 33 members in 1978. The team was made up of many Christians, but there were skeptics, atheists, agnostics, and Jews among them. So focusing a little on the STURP team, they spent more time with the shroud than any other research team in history, studied it for over 125 hours over 5 straight days. They ran over 24 different tests, and their full results took them between 2 and 4 years, depending on which result was published, to publish in over 20 different peer-reviewed scientific journals. Now, it's important to note this wasn't like, hey, call the news, we're going to talk about it. This was peer-reviewed, highly scrutinized scientific journals, which you can read today. They were very meticulous about the information that they reported. They reached a singular conclusion that the image in the shroud, the image specifically, was not and could not have been made by human hands. The STURP team was headed up by a physicist from the Air Force Academy named John Jackson, who was famous for saying, "Give me 15 minutes in the scientific method with the shroud, and I will prove to you it is made by human hands." 15 minutes after John Jackson began studying the shroud, he was singing a very different tune. If you are interested in more information on who is all on that team, Shroud.com has a full list of those names and much, much, much more information than you're going to see presented here. Since that was in 1978, many of those original members have died and or getting very close to death. It was a while ago. So the image. What is it? Well, after all the hours that the STURP team spent with it, as well as anybody else, basically the answer is we don't know, at least from a scientific point of view. What we know it is not is any paint, dye, stain, or scorching, and it's not made by any known artistic or natural process. The image itself is only 0.2 microns deep, resting on the topmost fibrils. Because it was an image created by some form of light, and it wasn't skin tight to the shroud, depending on the distance the body to the shroud was, depends on how dark the image appears, so you can actually glean 3-dimensional data from that image, and I've got some very cool pictures to show you of that. The image was created on the shroud after all of the fluids were deposited on it. So there's blood, pulmonary edema, all of that, lots of other stuff on there too. Water, minerals from water after trying to put out the fire, just all sorts of things. But as far as the blood and pulmonary edema is concerned, the image was made after those things. Let's see. That is good. Yeah, so impossible to recreate. If you wanted to recreate it, you would make the image of the body and put all the blood and everything on afterwards, so you could make it all match. And the opposite is true here. The image, like I said, was the last thing deposited on the shroud. It could not have been a photograph or a painting of any kind. Okay, so here's a little idea of what 0.2 microns look like. You probably can't even see it. It's the tiniest little pixel on the screen. But compared to a human hair and the linen fibrils themselves, that is how thick the substance of the image itself is. So we're not talking about much, which makes it pretty fascinating. We're able to see it at all. Since that light gives us three-dimensional data of what we'd be looking at, here is an incredibly accurate rendition of what the body would look like. You can see that it is not laying flat. The knees are hunched and the neck is down a little bit. I want you to imagine, based on this picture, it's lying flat. If you were a man nailed to a cross and you turn the image this way, that is exactly how your body would be positioned. We know without a shadow of a doubt this is a man who died of crucifixion. But the evidence you're going to see builds into that greatly. The white line around the body here is what the shroud would have looked like while resting around the body, and this is how the body would have rested. It would not have been flat. This is the condition it was in when the image was made. So the image is hypothesized to have been created in a 1/40th of a billionth of a second using 400 trillion watts of energy. This is more power than any nuclear weapon we're able to produce today. And if it had lasted for any more than 1/40th of a billionth of a second, obviously we wouldn't have a shroud. So it's very unique how this could have possibly happened. John Jackson, the STURB team lead, after their research, came up with what he called a fall-through radiation hypothesis, also known as the light burst hypothesis. He theorized that, assuming the man in the shroud is indeed Jesus, that at the moment that he was resurrected to life, that light burst would have appeared, and then he actually would have dematerialized, which is not outside the realm of possibility because we know he did that throughout Scripture. And the shroud would have fallen down into place, and Jesus would have gone about his way. In the Mark 9 account of the Transfiguration is referenced as a precedent for Jesus' body glowing once resurrected, so we know that the idea of light is not out of reach. And John 20:1-8 indicates the possibility that the disciples only believed once they saw the shroud and the face cloth with the shroud. Jeremiah Johnston, who is one of the experts on the shroud, believes that those cloths were potentially still glowing at the time of the resurrection, based on the what we see from Scripture and the evidence presented in the shroud itself. So very, very cool. Let's see. So digging into the forensic profile, what the shroud scientifically tells us, what we can glean, taking any speculation out of it, this is what we know. We have the physique of a lean and strong man, consistent with what Jesus would have been. Jesus was estimated to have walked 15 to 20,000 miles in his lifetime, raised as a carpenter's son. So the profile of the man we see here fits that perfectly. He has a long hair and beard, which is completely consistent with first century Jewish culture. And the position, you'll note the knees raised, backs hunched forward, buttocks not flattened. This is very important because it indicates that rigor mortis had already set in. If this man had died moments ago before he was buried, you would see that flattening, the body lay more flat. But this was a man who was buried well after he died, not hours and hours, but given some time. We see no decomposition, so there's no signs of fluids on the shroud indicating the body had decomposed. That's incredibly important because after more than 40 hours, you would absolutely have that. If this body had been present in the shroud, dead for a week, 2 weeks, the fluids we have on the shroud would be very, very different. And we don't have those. So it couldn't have been more than 40 hours. Yeah, so up to 39 hours, spanning over 3 days' time, which is absolutely consistent with the report in Scripture. As far as rigor mortis setting in, that can happen anywhere between 2 and 48 hours after death, also completely consistent with the biblical account. You'll notice the knees are slightly bent forward, back is slightly hunched forward. That is the position he died on the cross. And in the negative image, you'll notice that the blood is actually the darker parts, or is the lighter parts. It's, excuse me. Yes, in the negative image, the blood appears lighter, and the skin will appear darker, and that's because you're looking at the negative. When you turn it around, the blood is the dark part. Okay. So here's kind of a look at the specifics of the shroud. You'll notice in the top left, we're looking at the back side of the body here. We're looking at the front side of the body here. You'll see where it's noting shoulder abrasions, scourge marks from the Roman scourge. The buttocks is not flattened. Wounds in the feet, obviously. Lots of wounds on the head. You'll see that large, bright patch right here. That is a tremendous amount of blood and fluid from something. You know, we might theorize it's a spear wound, but who's to say? You can see the spot on the wrist where the crucifixion nails would have gone through. You'll also note where it says arms are elongated. Everything about the body is proportional, except the arms look too long, right? There's a very good reason for that. You'll see some contusions on the knees, and then the foot wound mentioned there too. So the scourging. We see hash marks all across the body, consistent with the Roman flagrum or scourge, dipped with smooth lead sinkers or sheep bone. The picture you can see here has those smooth lead sinkers. It wasn't uncommon for flagrums to be affixed with sharper objects, but it was also common for it to be done like this. This would allow for a body to be whipped longer and harder, which the Romans were very good at torturing their victims and keeping them alive. So that is what we see evidence of the body here. There's over 200 marks on the back and over 150 on the front. We are not able to see the size of the body in the image of the shroud. So we know there's at least 375 wounds total and likely more than that. It's important to note that scourging before crucifixion was not a common thing to happen. Usually under Roman punishment, one was either crucified or scourged, not both. So we're kind of narrowing in on who this person could possibly be. Let's see, wooden hand. The scourge was about it had three 18-inch long leather thongs, which the pieces were affixed to. And that's enough of that. Okay, so here's a picture of the recreation of the body again in 3 dimensions with the scourging. You can see those wounds are all kind of coming down into the side and across, which would have been typically how those marks were made, and they are absolutely consistent with that. Here's a little bit brighter image. It has a ring around the rear of the body, so it's kind of easier to see where stuff is. I think it highlights a lot more the wounds all throughout the body, and you can see on the back of the head, all the way down the shoulders, on the backs, the upper legs, the lower legs. Whoever this man is, the Romans spared no square inch of his body during the scourging. So,
I read a thing that it was hypothesized that the scourging before crucifixion was done given the Passover to speed up the death on the cross so that he wasn't up during the Passover.
Well, Pilate originally had Jesus scourged because he had no intention of crucifying him. He did that to please the Jews, to get the man out of there and get on with his life. The Jews demanded the crucifixion regardless, and so Jesus had to suffer both, is how I've had it explained to me at least. Okay, so we know that the man in the shroud wore a crown of thorns. There are 50 different wounds on the head. And it's very important to note here, they are on the front, they are on the back, and they are on the top. So the crown of thorns that you're used to seeing, that pretty little wreath with a few little pricks of blood on it, if this is in fact an image of Jesus, which I believe it is, that rendition you have seen is wrong. This would have been a helmet that covered his entire head. Now, this isn't really a stretch for us, because if you think of a king, do you think of a cutesy little wreath, or do you think of a helmet that covers the entire head? I think of a helmet that covers the entire head, but I'm just used to growing up seeing the wreath around it. We might need to change our idea on that. Not anything that should change any doctrine for us, but something that's important to know. There's many species of thorny plants native to Jerusalem area. We don't know which ones are used. There's no way to tell. What we do know is Jesus is the only historic figure ever recorded to have been crucified while inflicted with a crown of thorns. If it's ever happened before, nobody else recorded it ever. The idea of a wreath was popularized likely through Greek and Roman culture after the 1st century AD. The oldest known example of a replica of this today is in the Notre Dame Cathedral. Here's an example of what that helmet may have looked like. It is quite a bit rougher than most images we see shown today. Some more information on the crucifixion itself. We see the shoulders show abrasion consistent with carrying the patibulum. Patibulum is the cross beam of an actual crucifix or cross. The vertical area would have been the stipes. It's illogical to conclude that Jesus carried the full cross. It would have weighed over 300 pounds. He would have been in no condition to do so. It would also have been incredibly rare to do during the 1st century. Very likely he was just carrying the cross member, the patibulum. That would have weighed 75 to 125 pounds. The arms are too long. Why are the arms too long? Well, the shoulders are clearly dislocated. There are a couple theories as to when that happened. There are limestone fragments in the knees indicating that the man fell. It is quite likely that when the man fell, that the patibulum smashed into his back and dislocated his shoulders. It is also possible that while nailing the man to the crucifix, that is when the shoulders were dislocated as well. Regardless, they were dislocated likely in one of those two scenarios. Yes. The shoulders potentially separated from the body while fixed to the cross. Just said that. Okay, so blood running down towards the elbows on the back of the arms is important to note here. The arms would have to been at a 15 to 20 degree angle. This is absolutely consistent with how a body would have been held while being crucified. So everything lines up with a crucified man. Okay, and there's just another picture of that image. Just after we've kind of talked about those things, you can kind of hone in on what you're looking at. And all of these images are available online too, very easy to get at. Okay, so the hands, in relation to the hands, they are crossed over and shows a hole where the crucifix nails were fastened, where the wrist meets the hand. This little space is called Destot space. Destot was a French anatomist and radiologist. Etienne Destot lived in the 1864, died in 1918. He was a pioneer in the field of radiology and studied the anatomy of the wrist. So that, I don't know, in my mind, kind of brings us to a pretty solid conclusion that the crucifixion nails were not put into the hand. They were put into the spot right between the hand and the wrist right there. Not in a place that would have broken any bones. Obviously no conflict with Scripture there. That's the best place to affix a person to the cross to support the weights. You can see that the thumbs are not visible here. That's consistent with the nerve damage that would have been caused by putting a crucifixion nail through that spot. It would have caused the thumbs to curl in. So when the man was buried, they wouldn't have been out. They would have been in, which is why you don't see them. Feet definitely show the nail holes, again, in a technique that wouldn't break any bones. You also don't see any evidence of rope burns or any damage to the skin. This coincides with the fact that the man was light and lean. He didn't need any extra keeping him on the cross. It was not uncommon for larger criminals to have the weight of their bodies rip them off of the crucifixion nails. Smaller people didn't need that. This is a leaner man for sure. Yeah, that's part's not important. Okay. Crucifixion nails were typically about 9 inches long. The one you see in the example here is 5, but it would have looked like that. You can also see an example of an archaeological find. The little bone here in the nail is what we have found of a Jew named Yehochanan in a tomb north of Jerusalem in Gavat HaMiftar, discovered in 1968. The remains of an iron spike, 11.5 centimeters long, are still embedded in the victim's right heel bone. So if you want an idea of how that heel was affixed to the cross, it would have looked something like that. The spear wound. There's a massive blood wound between the 5th and 6th rib, and there is blood oozing, not dripping from that, indicated it was made after the heart had stopped beating. The blood around that wound is all post-mortem blood as well, which also backs that up. It's 4 centimeters across, which is perfectly consistent with the head of a Roman spear tip that you can see highlighted there. Pretty important piece of evidence. You can see that spear wound, and sometimes you're seeing images on the left, sometimes on the right. A lot of these are mirrored for whatever reason or the other. You can see that spear wound right there. Unfortunately, next to a spot that was burned in a fire, but still plenty that you can see in that spot there.
That line is where it was folded?
Well, it was folded a lot. It was folded many times. There, on the body itself, it would have been folded right here, and you can kind of see some marks right there where the folds were. There's some fold marks going up and down here as well. Linen retains memory of its fold, so the Sturb team was actually able to discover it was folded in lots of different ways over the years, even at one point in a way that would have been consistent with lifting out of a box, which I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, the blood on the shroud. This is a big deal. So the blood is type AB. This was discovered by the Sturb team. The body is unwashed and the blood is collected per Jewish tradition. Only 4 to 5% of people alive today have AB blood, but it is 3 times more common in Mediterranean Jews. Under UV light, the post-mortem blood shows the visible separation of the red blood cells from of the blood serum. That's how you can tell it is post-mortem. And the blood from the spear wound is exclusively post-mortem with 6 parts pulmonary edema fluid, say that 10 times fast, and 1 part blood. This is backed up by John 19:34, where it says, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. Okay, pulmonary edema fluid is the fluid that builds up around organs during organ shutdown. That fluid builds up in the lungs during asphyxiation. So when the side was pierced, that is why blood and water came out with the spear wound. The blood itself, or the lifeblood, which is the blood left while the victim is still alive, is also still present. This makes sense because Jesus would have shed a lot of blood while still alive. Hematologist and blood chemistry expert Alan Adler explains why the blood on the shroud is so red and not brown. You would think that blood on something this old would be dark brown or even black. The blood has high levels of bilirubin, ferritin, and creatinine, which is present in the blood and pulmonary edema fluid. These chemicals tell us that the victim was under extreme physical duress, suffering from organ failure, and was undergoing immense stress as well as suffocation. This leaves blood red in color even after drying and aging. Some more information about the body is while crucified with the shoulders dislocated, you wouldn't have been able to pull yourself up so you could breathe, so the chest would actually begin to crush your lungs, making it very difficult. Victims would begin to asphyxiate and would have to push up from their feet in order to breathe. This was lovingly referred to as the crucifixion dance by the Romans. Without doing this, you would have suffocated and died within 15 minutes. When a hasty death was required, they just broke the legs so the guy couldn't breathe anymore. There is absolutely no evidence of broken legs in the shroud image, which, again, like everything we've seen so far, completely coincides with Scripture. It's important to note, too, victims could typically live as long as a week on the cross while properly cared for without dying. And usually, as crucifixion victims were left on the cross to rot, as an example for those who would dare do the same thing in defiance of Rome. The fact that this man was buried in a linen shroud, let alone a fancy linen shroud, is, again, completely unique. Fun fact, 1 in 100 men doomed to die by Rome were crucified. A lot of them died in other interesting ways. The body is placed in the shroud and then wrapped in linen strips, per Jewish tradition. The body is not prepared. This body was not prepared completely by Jewish tradition, indicating that somebody planned to come and finish later. Again, aligning with Scripture in Luke 24:1, it tells us, on the first day of the week at early dawn, the women went to the tomb taking spices they had prepared. So, the body was hurriedly rushed to be buried before Passover set in, and then they would come back 3 days later to finish the process. They never got the chance. The Jewish burial tradition in Greek is called oselegium, meaning the second burial. The body would be prepared, and then they would wait for it to decay for a year. Then the bones would be collected and put in a bone box called an ossuary. It is extremely rare for any man to have been crucified and buried this way. Crucifixion victims, if they were buried at all, were typically buried in common graves. We've found over 150,000 bone boxes on the Mount of Olives, so that, again, backs up this information. Pollen. Here's a really good bit of this. So, when the STURP team is doing their research, for the first 20 hours that they were given to study it, they say, you know what, it's been Turin, Italy forever, we're going to let the Italian team come in and have some of our time. And the Italian team brought in a man by the name of Max Fry, who you'll see pictured here. Max was a pioneer in a new forensic technique using pollen to place suspects at a crime scene. And he used tape, used regular old tape, to stick to the shroud and collect samples. He was able to retrieve 38 samples, finds and identifies 58 different kinds of pollen. As the story goes, Max actually just stopped at the local grocery store and bought tape there to use on the shroud. Other researchers were horrified and actually had 3M later come up with a proprietary special tape that wouldn't cause any damage to the shroud, which ended up being completely useless. So the good old-fashioned tape from home did the trick. So the pollen collected was identified as being from northern Italy, Turin, where the shroud still resides today, southern France at a chapel called Chambray, northwestern Turkey in the area around Constantinople at the time, today known as Istanbul, southeastern Turkey near the town of Edessa, and the Jerusalem area. Incredibly important to note that most of the pollen on the shroud is from Jerusalem, and the majority of it was only something that would have bloomed during springtime. Is it all starting to add up yet? That's the majority of the information on the shroud, but some of the information that helps confirm the shroud is from a separate artifact altogether.
Keep your nerdiness out.
Nope, nerdiness stays. The Sudarium of Oviedo. What is that? That's a big fancy word. We talked about Sudarium earlier. It's just another word for shroud. This one particularly means face cloth or face napkin. And Oviedo is just a town. It's the town it's in. So the face cloth of the town. But Sudarium of Oviedo sounds way cooler than that. The Sudarium is a complementary artifact to the shroud, also mentioned with the burial cloth in John 25, verses 5 through 7. It's about the size of a pillowcase. It's made of far lower quality linen. It has a little hole you can see up here that's about the size of a blood drop. We have no idea why that's there. Could have been cut. Doesn't look like a burn. We don't know. But it's believed to have been wrapped around Jesus' face immediately after his death while on the cross and while preparing the body, removed after the body was interred. but left with the body. The Oviedo is a city in northern Spain where the Sudarium resides today. Unlike the shroud, there's no supernatural image on the cloth. It only bears bloodstains. This is when things start getting really cool. You can see there's 3 main stains areas that match nearly perfectly to the shroud. You'll see how they match here shortly. Lots of very uniquely defined shapes, making it very easy to align to the different bloodstains also on the shroud. The largest stain shows contrast with the nostrils, beard, and chin. That's this stain here in the middle. And the vertical area shows the bridge of the nose. The blood on the Sudarium matches that of the shroud. It is also AB, also containing pre- and post-mortem blood. And the Sudarium was used to collect the blood, preventing as much as possible from being lost. So again, that Jewish tradition of burial required not losing any of the blood, or losing as little of the blood from the body as possible. I think I actually talk about that here in my next slide. Also important to note here that the Sudarium matches extremely closely, but not perfectly, with the shroud. Oh, that throws it off, right? Couldn't possibly be a match. Wrong! This is positive evidence due to the likelihood that the Sudarium was placed on the body first while it was moved. Then the shroud was placed over the body afterward. The body would have been moved and jostled a little bit. It would be weird if it matched perfectly. It's very, very close, but it doesn't match up, and that's a good thing. There's also evidence of a hand reaching over the back of the head to pinch the Sudarium around the nose while the body was laying face down. More on that here. So here's a larger picture of the Sudarium. You can see that main area. You can see the image on the other side that looks like almost it's mirrored. Really good reason for that. And this area is actually what would have been on the back of the head. This graph here points out all the little different stains they have on it. They've got odd little names for all of them. You're looking at the front of the face here. We won't focus on that for too long. Here is kind of an overlay of how those stains match up to the body. You can see a majority of the blood pooling around the nose and in the mustache. Gets kind of down into the beard, and a lot of it pools up by the head as well. This was really helpful for me. Shows how the face would have been aligned in the cloth. And that's going to carry over to the next one here. So, why collect the blood? Leviticus 17:11 says that for the life of the flesh is in the blood. Orthodox Jewish custom was to bury bodies with the blood because of this. Any and all blood spilled on clothing or on the ground would have been collected whenever possible. So that is why we have all of this blood on the body. It was not washed. That is not how Jews buried their dead. The hair on the body is pulled into a ponytail, which you might have noticed in some previous images. This image here, stain on the left, is where that ponytail was gathered and actually pinned to the Sudarium so it could be wrapped around the head. Here is the back of the cloth. You can see all of these blood stains up here from where the thorn holes in the head would have been. You can see light staining here from where the blood in the hair was. You can see a large stain here from where somebody had to physically grab the hair to be able to pin the Sudarium to it so they could wrap it. Really cool. And there's how that matches up to the back of the head. You can see highlighted here that hair bound in that ponytail where it was grabbed. So why does it have that weird mirror image on it? Well, and this part blows my mind. The mirrored image of the stain to the right of the stain is explained because of how Jesus' head was when he died, or the man on the cross. It's Jesus, whatever. So Jesus is on the cross, he dies, and his head has to go somewhere. Well, it goes down like this. And when the Sudarium was wrapped, they couldn't get it around the side of the head because it was already pinned to this side. So they actually bound it, wrapped it, and then doubled back, which is why you have that mirror image on the cloth. We always see, what my brain goes to is, well, how did somebody get up there to put the cloth on his face in the first place? Well, we always see the picture of Jesus hanging 10 to 12 feet or more in the air. That's not how it was done. That's just how we see it in the movies. Jesus was crucified at eye level to all of his friends and neighbors. That's what's so impactful about crucifixion. Somebody could have walked up to him and just put the sudarium around his face. There's just a little bit bigger version of that picture showing you this is the back of the body. The head would have been tilting this way, and it would have been wrapped and then wrapped back around. All just to keep any blood from leaving the body. They wanted to preserve all of that and keep it with it. So forensic study of the sudarium tells us much about the time between when Jesus died and when he was buried. It's incredible what they're able to tell. They can tell that the body is upright and dead on the cross and has the wrap on it for at least 45 minutes to an hour based on the amount of blood collected. The body is then taken off the cross, placed face down with the feet slightly elevated, which makes sense because that's the direction they would have been pointed with the body hunched the way it was, resting on the forehead, slightly rocked forward for another 45 minutes for an hour. And that's why you can see all of that blood pooled up on the forehead. So that explains why that is that way. The body is then placed face up for no more than 5 minutes before the sudarium is then removed. Now, the sudarium wouldn't have been removed until the body was moved into the tomb. If you follow the archaeological evidence for where Golgotha and the tomb is, you know that Golgotha is no more than 50 yards away from Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. 5 minutes is an incredibly reasonable amount of time for people to carry a body to a tomb 50 yards away.
When they brought him in, the shroud would have already been laying there, laid him on it,
Yes.
and folded it.
Yes, the shroud would have been laying there, would put the body on, remove the sudarium, laid the shroud down, put the sudarium with it, and close the door. Max Fry, remember him? He did all the pollen stuff. So he's actually able to get his hands on the sudarium as well in 1979 and identified 16 different types of pollen. These come from northern Spain, Oviedo, where he's doing the testing. Central Spain, Toledo. It's incredible how even in a country as small as Spain, you can tell a difference based on the pollen. Northern Africa, near the area where Alexandria once stood, and again, Jerusalem. There were other pollen tests done on it later, which revealed 25 additional species, all matching Fry's initial findings. Aaron, I'm sorry you have lost the bet. He thought I'd be under an hour. We're not going to be there. Okay. So, since we're on the topic of the sudarium already, we'll transition into the history of it now. There's not a lot to say about the history of the sudarium. We don't know a lot from very many writings, but we do know some. There's essentially nothing we know about it before the 8th century. Most information we know comes from the 11th century bishop of Oviedo named Paleo, and a 6th century journal from a pilgrim to the Holy Land named Antonius the Pilgrim. The journey talks of a cave he visited in Israel, near where John the Baptist's ministry was located. The cave was guarded by 7 nuns, and his claim is that they were said that they were guarding many different relics as well as the sudarium itself. Not the shroud, just the sudarium. So what we do know is in 1614, the Persians laid siege to Jerusalem, and the sudarium and other artifacts where we assume were able to escape to Alexandria in Egypt. Again, the pollen data matches up with that. In 616, Persians again strike Alexandria. Sudarium escapes on a boat and is sent to Cartagena, Spain, in the care of the local bishop there. The bishop takes it to Seville immediately. It remains there until the bishop dies. It's then taken to Toledo in 636. At about that time, the Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula begins. So the shroud is taken to Asturias in 711 in the northern mountains of Spain, where the Muslim armies never reach. The king of Asturias records the sudarium protected them in his records. Later, the king will found the city of Oviedo, builds a cathedral there, and that is where the shroud, the sudarium, has remained to this day since the year 711. That's wild. and it's been on exhibit 3 times a year ever since. You can see kind of here the journey that it would have taken on the map from Jerusalem down to Alexandria and then across the Mediterranean into Spain. This is where it is today. The image on the left, you can see that is the box that it was kept in for centuries when not on display. You can see the replica, much like the shroud, shown there. Just behind that replica, when removed, you see the actual sudarium. You can go and see it. If you plan your vacation right, you can go see it in Spain next Good Friday, I think. So, on to the history of the shroud. I'll try to pick up the pace here. So, we have quite a bit more of the history of the shroud, quite a bit more. The oldest evidence we have comes from the early historian Eusebius, who we get a great deal of Christian history from. He was at the First Ecumenical Council. He was Constantine's biographer. So as far as history from the 300s goes, he's the guy to look at for lots of stuff. So anything he says about the shroud, you should pay attention to. The first mention comes from a story about the king of Edessa named Abgar V. Allegedly, Abgar sent a letter to Jesus during his ministry asking him to come to Edessa and heal him. Allegedly, Jesus wrote a letter back to him that he had a courier deliver that said something along the lines of, I got it here, "Blessed art thou who hast believed in me, having not seen," but declines to visit Edessa because he needs to be in Jerusalem for all sorts of reasons. Crazy. After the crucifixion, according to Eusebius, not one of the apostles, but one of the disciples, one of the 72, named Judas Thaddeus, takes the shroud with him, places it over Abgar, and heals him of whatever malady he said he had. Many historians think the story about the letter is untrue, but what we know for sure is that it ended up in Edessa somewhere or another, and this is the only account we have of how, so take that for what you will. Abgar keeps the shroud and hides it in a box over the city gates. Typically over city gates, there would have been all the pagan gods of the city. He knocks out the pagan icons of it, puts it over the city gate, and Edessa is a Christian city for years and years and years, until Abgar's grandson reverts to paganism, at which point the bishop of Edessa there is afraid that the shroud might be destroyed, so he removes it from the gate, hides it in the city wall, bricks over it, and nobody knows anything about it for 400 years. Its location is completely forgotten until in 544 the Persians lay siege to Edessa. During the siege, the bishop of Edessa, then 400 years later, reports to have received a vision of the shroud's location and is told to retrieve it and save it from the invading Persians. He goes down there, takes apart the wall, finds the shroud in the box. They're so excited about it, again, during the siege by the Persians, that they hang it on the banner and parade it around the city. While they're parading it through the city, they notice some copper pots shaking on the ground on the parade route, a place that they normally wouldn't have gone to look. Well, they do some investigating and find out the pots on the ground are shaking because the Persians are digging a tunnel underneath the city. So the Edessans open the tunnel, fill it with oil, light the fire, burn out all the Persians, and it ends up breaking the siege. So without, in the story, without the vision leading the bishop to the shroud and going on the parade, Edessa may well have in fact fallen. There are other accounts that it was a flood in the year 525 that broke apart the wall, revealing the location of the shroud, but those are the only two main accounts that we have, so decide for yourself what you think makes sense there. By 545, the shroud is well known in the town. It is known as the image of Edessa, or the Mandylion, which is Greek for towel. Very exciting. And it was likely presented in a box with only the face showing. Most people would have not have known anything else was there. The shroud stayed in Edessa until 943, until the Byzantine Emperor Romanos brings it to Constantinople along with many other relics. He was basically doing an inventory of all the artifacts within the empire and bringing them all to himself. It arrives there a year later in 944 and remains till 1203. Then, in 1203, we have a first-hand account of a Crusader knight named Robert de Clary, seeing the shroud in the Cathedral of My Lady St. Mary of Blecharnay. Gesundheit. He logs all the relics he sees on his journeys, and he notes that he sees the shroud. It is displayed upright in the cathedral every Friday. It is said to have been placed on a mechanism that was raised out of a chest, folds in the shroud, aligned with that. And then in 1204, Constantinople is sacked by Western Crusaders in the Roman Empire. And then they loot and destroy many relics and take the remaining spoils back to Europe. The shroud is unaccounted for 150 years until it appears in Lyre, France. I'm probably saying that wrong. Lyre. Under the care of a knight named Geoffrey de Charny, with no explanation of how it got there. We do have a little bit of information that might tell us how it got to move from Constantinople to France. The best account we have comes from a letter written to Pope Innocent III in 1205 by the King of Thessaly. And the letter states that after the sack of Constantinople, the shroud was recovered in Athens, Greece. Athens at the time is ruled by a French man by the name of Othin de la Roche. And he's given the position as a reward for his service in the Fourth Crusade, the same crusade in which Constantinople was sacked. De la Roche was tasked with protecting the Cathedral of My Lady St. Mary of Blecharnay, where the shroud was kept. De la Roche's great-great-granddaughter then marries a man, or her name was Jean de Virgo, and marries Geoffrey de Charny. De Charny presents the shroud then in France in 1355. So relatively easy to connect the dots, who it went with and how it got there. Why was it kept quiet all this time? Well, there's a pretty good idea of why. In 1215, Pope Innocent III made a proclamation outlawing owning or displaying any relics without the express permission of the church. If de Charny had said that he had the shroud at that point, it would have very likely been taken from him. So, there you go. An alternate story that doesn't really have any evidence, aside from just a little bit here at the end, is that the Knights Templar had the shroud during that time. There's no written account of this anywhere. The only evidence we have is of an image that was painting on a ceiling in an old Templar building in England that was revealed after a storm damaged it in 1951. And that image closely matches the face in the shroud. You can see that image there. 150 years after de Charny presents the shroud in France, on March 22nd, 1453, his ancestor Margaret de Charny sells the shroud due to financial hardship. The shroud is purchased by the royal house of Savoy in Italy, and the King of Savoy puts the shroud in the Chambéry Cathedral, which is now part of France. And then the big fire happens. It erupts in 1532, and it accounts for the triangle-shaped holes we see in the shroud. After this fire, the nuns added the linen backing and patched 30 different patches over 16 different holes. What had happened is the shroud was kept in a silver box when the fire broke out, and the box got so hot that the silver inside the box melted and started chewing up those big chunks out of the corners of the shroud. As it was folded, it would have just burned away those corner sections. The shroud was able to be recovered and taken out and thankfully salvaged. 50 years later, still under the care of House Savoy, the shroud is moved to Turin, Italy. Remains there to this day. First photographed in 1898. The Stirrup team investigates in 1978. In 1983, remember that date, the last king of Savoy dies and bequeaths the shroud to the papacy. And then the carbon dating test, some of you may be familiar with, is conducted in 1988. Now that the Catholic Church owns it. Important. So here's a picture of the journey the shroud would have taken from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople, then possibly to Athens, but then for sure up to Lyre, then Chambéry, and then Turin, where it is now. It's interesting to make the juxtaposition to where the Sudarium went, because they both went all over the known world at the time, which I can't help but feel is not a coincidence. The carbon-14 dating. So, I mentioned at the beginning that, well, the carbon-14 dating proves it's a medieval hoax, so why are we talking about this anyways? Well, pay attention. After the STIRP team published their findings in 1988, after running over 24 different tests confirming the authenticity of the image as not made by human hands, a few of the remaining members decide it's time to take a carbon-14 dating sample. So the plan is to take 7 samples from 3 different areas of the shroud and use different methods to test the age of each sample. Then at the last minute, as the Catholic churches want to do, the Archbishop changes the rules and ruins everything. Only 1 sample is allowed to be taken from the upper left-hand corner. It is given to 3 different labs, and the carbon-14 dating is the only testing that they're allowed to do. The church to this day has offered no explanation as to why this happened. STIRP team specifically requested several areas of the shroud not to be tested due to fear of contamination. They were told specifically to take a sample from an area they suspected to be contaminated anyways. 6 months after the test, all 3 labs agree that the sample dates between 1260 and 1380. Regardless of all the tests done to prove its authenticity beforehand, the media runs with this new information, declaring it a fraud, and this is the Catholic Church shuts down anybody else being able to look at. It's in fact the last direct scientific experiment we've had on the shroud since the end. Or is it? This is a picture of that top left corner being cut to take samples out of. And you'll notice here a spot that says 1973 sample area. We haven't talked about that yet, but that is coming up. So despite the assumed discreditation, there's still people who are very convinced, as they should be, and research continued on the remaining samples. There's an amateur research team by the name of Joe Marino and Sue Benford that proposed that the sample was from a repaired section of the shroud. Well, one of the original chemists on the STIRP team, Raymond Rogers, hears of this and decides to test a section of the 1988 sample he has against some earlier samples of threads that were collected in 1973. He discovers the original sample contains cotton coated with plant gum made to look like linen that they then determined was used in a medieval repair technique called an invisible reweave. So it was made to look like the original shroud even though it wasn't. Now we know that that sample couldn't have been original because Jewish tradition wouldn't have allowed multiple fabrics to be used in a burial shroud. So now things get interesting. Rogers publishes his findings in a 2005 chemist journal. You know the one, you read it, right? No, you didn't read it. Nobody read it. It didn't get picked up. Not a lot of people saw his information, but it confirmed nonetheless that the test in 1988 was botched. Media and scientific...
The Associated Press wasn't on that?
Yeah, they was like, nah, forget it, doesn't matter. And that's kind of where things stood up until very recently. In 2002, a new kind of test called WAXS, wide-angle X-ray scattering, was used on the 1973 thread samples, which were the linen fibrils, not the cotton, that the Italian research team, an Italian research team headed by Dr. Liberato De Caro of the Italy Institute of Crystallography. Oh, that sounds fancy. The coolest thing about this, it is a completely non-destructive technique. You can sample the same thing 1,000 times. You don't hurt it at all. Very cool. It was an innovative test that had never been used on textiles before. But when performed on linen, it measures the degradation of the cellulose on the linen. Now, it's important to know you have to have a comparable sample to compare it to. Oh, no. Oh, there we go. Maybe I'm dying. To be able to determine how old it is versus the sample thing. So this is handy because we have lots of linen samples throughout history. There's a 3000 BC, so a 5,000-year-old sample from Egypt. We have one from almost the exact same time Christ was crucified from the siege of Masada, dating to 55 to 74 AD, as well as modern linen. So the WAXS testing was done on the shroud, And wouldn't you know it, it came back with a date of early 1st century. But because this testing is still new and approximate, we're still not accepting it as the mainstream dating. Even though, carbon-14 dating is so spot on and perfect every time, right?
But they'll accept COVID
Yeah.
testing that was 10 minutes old.
Yep, absolutely. There are some other doubts about the shroud. There is evidence that paint is on the shroud. And if that's all you see, you're like, oh, paint. Well, dig into it a little more. There's trace elements of iron oxide, which we know was present in medieval paint, but there's only trace amounts. There's as much paint on the shroud to potentially make 1 drop of blood. And there's nothing added to the cloth. The paint remnants are deposits on top of the cloth. So what likely happened here is a replica was made, many replicas likely, made with paint, placed on the shroud to bless it before taken on to wherever they would be presented. All of the forensic data matches that conclusion. A really, really cool thing about the shroud, I'm getting close to the end here for everybody, is what we see in art history. And this, if the proverbial nail hasn't been put in the coffin for you, I think this will do it. In the 1930s, a man by the name of Paul Vignon, a French art historian, recognized that pictures of Jesus made before the 6th century, starting in the 6th century, primarily the Byzantine type, showed an astounding similarity to each other as opposed to pre-6th century artwork. In the Byzantine style artwork, he identifies 15 key features that almost match entirely in all of them. And in the late 1970s, a psychiatrist at Duke University, Dr. Alan Wanger, continues this research and finds that in the art piece Christ Pantocrator in Catherine's Monastery, dated 550 AD, shares 175 different data points that match exactly. So, pre-6th century art of Jesus looks like this. And what you note on these is they all look very different. You see actually a very, the earliest depiction we have is by the Romans with putting a horse on Jesus' head, actually meant to make fun of him, but confirming he was real. Joke's on you. Then we have guys with a beard, guys without a beard, guys with blonde hair, chubby guys, skinny guys, all sorts of different variation. Well, guess what happens after the supposed shroud is found in Edessa? Huh. How about that? Those all look really similar. And then you have the Christ Pantocrator image here specifically, comparing it to the face you see on the left. And then you see some overlays of that face here. It's identical. How else could they have come up with this image? From the 6th century. Important. So that was all the artwork. There's a coin with Jesus' face on it, dated from 695, on display at the Istanbul Archaeology Museum today. Wanger's research on that showed 140 different points that matched the coin to the shroud. And then there's a page from the Hungarian prayer manuscript dating to 1195, 65 years earlier than the carbon dating would have estimated the shroud's maximum age to be, that shows the L-shaped holes and the 3/1 herringbone pattern. And it also, interestingly enough, potentially depicts the siderium with it. Here is the image of the siderium, or the shroud face, as well as the coin. And here is what those two images look like overlaid. Again, as perfect match as can be. Here is the image of that Hungarian prayer journal, just comparing it to the shroud on the right. And you can see it's a depiction of Jesus being entombed in the shroud. And if we look a little closer at the bottom image, you can see that exact 3/1 herringbone pattern and the L-shaped burn marks. What else could that be? So, odds that it's Jesus. Let's break it down. According to Dr. Gary Habermas, who was in direct contact with the Shroud team, came up with his estimates. The idea that it was a man in a crown of thorns, 1 in 400, that the body didn't decompose, 1 in 10, spear wound, 1 in 27, crucified without ropes, every other, same with the scourge marks, about 1 in 2. The legs weren't broken in the linen and buried in the linen shroud. Well, that could have been 1 in 82,944,000 people. A man named Bruno Barbarius, the associate professor of the mathematical physics at Turin University, decided that those numbers didn't quite Those numbers didn't quite add up. He did his own analysis and determined that there was a 1 in 200 billion chance that the man in the shroud could be anyone other than Jesus of Nazareth. Considering there were 200 to 400 million people alive on Earth in the 1st century AD, the odds add up pretty quickly who we're looking at. So some fun notes here in conclusion. There stands today a standing offer by a British filmmaker, David Rolfe, that says, if you can make the shroud the way it's made, I'll give you $1 million. It's been up since 2022. Nobody's taken up on it yet. And the man who took the photograph of the shroud, Barry Schwartz, was an atheist Jew on the team, struggled with the authenticity of the shroud for much of his life, and before dying confessed that he believed the shroud was in fact Jesus' burial cloth, showing the exact instant of his resurrection. Pretty cool. All evidence points to the authenticity of the shroud and the Sudarium of Oviedo. The image was not created by man. The man in the shroud can be none other than Jesus of Nazareth, and the objections to it are easily overcome with verifiable data and scientific testing. And the most important thing to take away from this is, if none of this is true, the case for the truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is airtight without all of this. Thank you very much. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to come together here tonight. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share what I think is the gift that you've left humanity, showing the truth in an absolutely undeniable way of the moment of your resurrection, Lord. We're so pleased to have that. We're so pleased to have it and continued through history and be something we can look at today and see tangibly, to look at and know for a fact that you died for our sins and were raised again. And we will someday live with you in your raised body in heaven, eternally, knowing full well the sacrifice you made for us so that we could live with you. We're so grateful for this, Lord. We pray that you would help this information guide our lives, guide our witness to those around us, so that we may make heaven crowded on your behalf. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.